Good morning still. How are you all? First of all, I want to thank Peter and Isabel and Elaine and everybody here for the invitation and for coming in that very, very cold day a couple of years ago in Toledo, and to thank Ernst and Loda for opening up a conversation. You know, the dialogue across the Atlantic is something I think that's rather special. We have a very sophisticated art museum structure in America, with an organization that's 100 years old, the Association of Art Museum Directors. And yet it's basically 240 individuals who think very differently and all run different kinds of museums. So one of the things that I think is first to emphasize is that there are lots of different models, and they're all valid in their own way, depending on where they are, because their context is where they're situated. But thank you, Isabel, for emphasizing that particular aspect of our museum. We do have a very single purpose. The purpose of Toledo Museum of Art is art education. It's just two words. And if you look up the purpose of American art museums generally, it's quite a paragraph. And usually it's the traditional one of display, interpret, acquire, so on, so on, so on. But if the purpose is art education, well then what would be the method by delivery? And that would be, we believe, visual literacy. The first thing just to say as well is that in order to really tackle this type of an approach like you're doing here, and I'm actually very inspired by what you're doing here. It's very, very exciting. You are a model. In fact, I would suggest you are the model in Europe right now for this sort of approach, which I think has potential to revolutionize museums. It's another version of art education, but one that is seeking to be very contemporary. And that is that there are three things that a museum should seek to be. First of all, it should seek to be relevant. And secondly, it should seek to be sustainable, not permanent, sustainable. And thirdly, it should seek to be diverse and inclusive. So those three things really govern the whole way that I approach museums. And this is now my fourth museum and my third museum to direct. And I've been 7 years now in Toledo. And so it's a kind of a model. It's the way that I like to do things, but it's not the way that I'm doing things. It's the way that all of us are doing things in our own way, based on a particular philosophy of how to approach art education. So what I'm not talking about today is the fact that we're in Toledo, Ohio, essentially a post-industrial city that is still very industrial in two ways. Every Jeep Wrangler is made there. The Jeep Cherokees are made there. They have always been made there. And it's the glass city of America. So the major glass corporations of America are there. So other ways to consider visual literacy, I think, in an art museum in terms of sustainability is to think about those sorts of issues about glass, glass inside and outside, glass as a mirror, glass as reflection, glass as refraction. And, you know, the type of ways that we approach a museum is through a looking glass. The glass of our eyes is the fundamental of visual literacy. And, you know, I'm not going to talk about the fact that our museum is completely structured that way. We've 3,000 solar panels. We're totally off the grid most of the time. We get paid for our energy because we generate energy back to the grid. So sustainability, what a visual literacy means about a museum is what do people see when they approach your museum? Not your collection, your entire museum. What do they understand by it? And we've been a test site for LED lights for 20 years. Because General Electric is actually based for their lighting in Cleveland, and they use Toledo Museum of Art as a test market for our lights. We're entirely LED, but the latest LEDs that are not on the market yet. So I just mentioned that as a sort of a sense of what is it to be truly holistic. But let's proceed. The whole concept of lifelong learning, which is fundamental to what Loda is doing, and many people approaching the idea of it's not the most pretty phrase, but cradle to grave. The whole idea of thinking about our visitors as the whole community offers significant opportunity to us today. The first point about this, it was mentioned, you know, I believe that babies also see in black and white, you know, for actually up to 3 months. And so the whole concept of working on babies is something that fascinates me. Babies are very good for analysis for brain scientists because they sleep a lot. And therefore you can fix things to their heads more than you can to others. And a lot of work is being done by Ghislaine Delaine in Paris, whose husband Stan won the Brain Prize last year. And they're an amazing couple. So what we're learning about ourselves is a whole other aspect that I want to consider as well as we talk. This fundamental issue is really important, that every single thing that you see is already an image. We see in images because our eyes make with our brain everything into an image. So in that sense, nothing is real. There are two ways that we consider the whole aspect of visual literacy which I think help. One is that visual literacy is not a very helpful term. And we've done a lot of focus groups on this. And once people hear the word literacy, they generally think remedial. There's something wrong with me that needs to be improved. So I think that that's been an aspect. The fact that the IVLA, the International Visual Literacy Association, has been around since 1969 but hasn't made a lot of impact on the educational system is because fundamentally they have a title that people don't particularly like. And that's for me too. So we've vox popped this, and even though I'll use today phrases with you that you understand, I wouldn't use them outside. I had to be retrained. I was put in for retraining about 4 years ago. And I talk publicly about visual language. People understand what it means to learn a language, that it has a vocabulary and it has a grammar, and you have to learn how to speak it in order to be able to read it as well, and then to have a literature around it, and to think about the language and be able to think in the language and about the language. So, you know, thinking about language as a spoken language or written language, we can make an analogy to the way people think about visual language that makes sense for them, or so we've found. The second issue is that the word metacognition is absolutely fantastic for us. But a bit like hermeneutics, you should never use it in public because people haven't a clue what you're talking about. So the idea of thinking about thinking, or the meaning of meaning, is already complicated enough. But it helps to use words like that instead of the words that we think of academically. And I just put that as a sort of the wisdom of knowing. And we've tried it the other way, and guess what? It just doesn't work. So I think it's very important in the way that we actually use our terms academically. The idea that's been mentioned that everything in this age is an image. I'm working on a book. It's called Do You Speak Visual? I can't tell you how much information I've got, how many books I've got, how many articles I've got there. It's over 15 years now. But, you know, the amount that's written is huge, but the amount of digested information to the way that we heard it this morning, those are very, very clear demonstrations. In America, there's no such thing as a competency model. We don't even have a Department of Education or a European Commission or anything that could work collectively to try to make any of us do anything together. I mean, we don't want rules for everybody. We don't even like the tax system. We all have different tax systems in different states. We move to states because there's no state tax and no income tax, right? And you only want to pay federal tax. So the type of model that you have possible in Europe is something you should delight in. The ubiquity of visuals is something we all take for granted. But really exploring how people agree, whether people agree with that or not, or understand what it means, is something I want to look at first of all. So first of all, the idea of visual literacy. This is the way I find it useful. It's not just reading and writing visual language. It actually requires the center part. You write when you can understand. You read and then you understand. You can use the word understand instead of comprehend, because already comprehend can be confusing for some people. The most important point I think I want to make today is that vision creates empathy. We are social beings, and if anything you can learn from brain science, it's to know that our senses are generally conditioned to socialization. As human beings, we tend to want to be nice to each other. And that is a really important fact, that vision creates empathy. This very image and the use of images is important as well. And I just want to maybe, I want to show you something that, would you mind, Peter, just putting this on? The museums are places that can create memories, and memories are moments. And this is a brilliant little video that was made by Radiolab in New York, and look them up. They're fantastic. They do lots and lots of great videos. But this is just a quick one, which basically tells the story of your own life.
The moment was...
How would you define a moment?
I can't even say.
I don't know. Ask me something simple. A moment in normal time. Normal time is this.
What is a moment, though, honestly?
It's that thing, it's beyond the senses.
Moment.
I don't know.
So I think it's impossible to watch something like that without feeling empathetic. There must have been something in there for each of you, and every time you see that, there will be some moment in it that will strike you that you will take away. And the idea of the museum as a series of moments is something that I would really encourage to explore. What do things mean? Why visual literacy? There's two really important reasons. The first is this. Just look at it. The world had 1 billion people for the first time in 1804. It had 4 billion people for the first time in 1974. And it will have 8 billion people by 2024. We've gone from 4 billion to 8 billion in 50 years, in my lifetime. That is astonishing. And is a reason to seek visual literacy, because now you've got so many people who need to communicate with each other across the world in order to save the planet. This is really important. Oops. There. So the idea of starting empathy and regarding empathy as a social role of museums is something that I'd encourage. This is the second reason. that we are living in a communications revolution, not a transport revolution. Sometimes we can get carried away. About 1900, you had a transport revolution. Can you imagine how exciting it was to be in an era of cars and ocean liners and planes and trains and radio? I mean, we think we've got something with this digital world. Yeah, but that was something. But it was a transport revolution, not really a communications revolution, because the agency here is personal. And so the possibility of moving from cuneiform writing 5,000 years ago, it took us 4,500 years to get to the next one in the printed revolution. And, Utopia and Thomas More and everything you're doing here is about this last communications revolution, 500 years ago, which caused a revolution religiously as well, and social upheaval, and the death of St. Thomas More. But it's this, the concept of the digital native, which is absolutely changing everything. We are in a moment of huge change. So the change is about the population of the world and about the way that we communicate in the world. Now, if you knew that and you were an art museum, what would you do? You'd regard the world as your oyster and you would use technology. But I've yet to meet the museum that doesn't go and hire, like the Metropolitan Museum, 80 people, to develop an incredible system and then have to fire half of them because most people didn't use the material. And so for each of us, the challenge is how to use it successfully and how to do something, first of all, for our own people. Look at this. This is YouTube, the number of hours uploaded in a minute. Just look what's happened since 2007 when it started. Right? You're getting the same exponential curve that you're seeing in population. And this is going to continue. And so the ubiquity of this concept of do you speak visual and the ways that platforms are being established, which are, already sold for enormous sums of money. I'll talk about Oculus Rift. Oculus Rift sold for $20 billion to Facebook, right? Before they'd ever made anything. So brain science, I've had an incredible opportunity in the last number of years. First of all, at Dartmouth College, where the major postgraduate degrees they give out are in cognitive neuroscience, and where Mike Gazzaniga worked for a long time, who's really the guru of, the person who really did most to develop Sperry's concept of left brain and right brain, and what we understand by that. And what we understand now by that is that really it's not really about left and right, it's about the way they communicate together, okay? But the opportunity to do that, and then more recently to work with Sir Colin Blakemore and be invited to his seminar with his Rethinking the Senses group in Britain, which brings together scientists and philosophers, mostly from Europe, but also from America, has really changed the way that I understand the world and how we construct the world in images. And when we construct the world in images, it means we imagine our own world. That's a very, very challenging concept, because it means that actually things that we think are real, like religion, to the scientist doesn't make any sense in this concept. It's an imaginary structure that we put in to put some sort of order on our world. Now, I'm not saying that's it, whether you should believe in religion or not. It's basically that's the logical conclusions of what's coming through. And so these sorts of your like this one today, can be incredibly powerful, although their size may not be huge, because of what you do with the material that you learn. The idea that your mind sees what your eyes can't is really important. Right now, what this practically means is that 90% of what you think you're seeing right now, you're not seeing right now, you've already seen it. Only 10% you're seeing now, at your age, for everybody here. Because we fill in with everything that we've seen. So if culture is what we do around here, that's the best definition I've ever heard of culture. And cultures are what we all do around here in different ways around here. Right? It is about the ways that we have seen the world up to today and what we're seeing now, because we bring our whole cultures with us to the culture we experience. And that's fundamentally important. But what's also important is this idea that we take in more information with our eyes, and our eyes are focused, our vision sense is focused on 30% of our brain. So it's way more than our other senses. But, I mean, the nearest one is 8%, right, for hearing. And when that's true, and we know how important our eyes are, we would be very, very focused on educating how to use them. And so this is where the art museum comes in. So our education system teaches textual literacy. For 500 years we've focused on this. We are focal point learners. What I've learned by working with indigenous peoples and also people who have difficulty with digits and letters is that you're kind of looking at a pre-500 years ago way of seeing. You're seeing with a big picture. It's somebody who can walk into the room and see the whole room at the same time. Whereas we're trained to look at one thing at a time. In fact, I look at you and I look at you until I blink and then I look at you. I'm trained to look at one thing at a time. The digital framework is actually offering us an opportunity to see differently, to be able to explore the idea of multiple perspectives and multiple depth. And that's particularly the case since we have virtual reality. But the idea that our senses, which are the way that we gather most of information, is actually tertiary. I mean, it's the third thing that we do, if we do it at all. We push it to the margins of the curriculum, is the essential critique of our education system today and the vital role of museums. Because museums work in that space. And particularly as you're looking at M. Leuven, you are planning to be in that space. You know, what's fascinating about the dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of books that I've got is that hardly any of them have any pictures. I mean, the whole books on visual literacy are consumed by telling us the story in text. You know, we had a chap come to a conference a while back he was the first person to have done a PhD in images at an Ivy League college at Columbia. He basically made a PhD as a cartoon book. Now, you know, that type of concept is totally new. Trying to find ways to have interventions and cause people to think differently in the museum is a very, very exciting prospect. And this actually went up 2 weeks ago in our museum in Toledo. It's in the center of our major gallery. It's a work called Plexus, and it's by Gabriel Daw, an artist from Mexico City, who uses thousands of individual threads that are strung in a vortex like a contrapposto figure. So it looks like a rainbow. It's not actually a rainbow, but it has the effect of refractive light. It is astonishing, and our public are absolutely loving it, causing people to think in a very conventional classic museum about what we're doing in a very, very different way. And these sorts of interventions are what I want to encourage. So the ways that you're thinking, to think in multisensory ways, means, for example, when we had our Degas exhibition earlier this year, we had a dance floor as a third of the exhibition. And we rehearsed for the Nutcracker consistently in the exhibition space and invited our audiences to go in and take the poses of the Degas figures while being able to see the Degas figures in the next room. So the idea of actually inviting this was kind of a real challenge to our curator at first, who wasn't at all sure that his credibility was going to be enhanced. But he ended up being selected as Mother Ginger for the Nutcracker, that particular role where all the little girls run out from underneath your dress. So it's rather exciting at the end. But the rewards are many. But the challenge is big as to what to try to do. So the next sort of thing that I want to say to you is this, that if you know this to be true, the question is, what are you doing about it? And that's the big challenge for our museum. So ABC. The ABC of today, always be connecting, always be communicating, always be charging. You know, I am annoyed with an airplane in America if it doesn't allow me to charge my phone while I'm on the plane. Or charge anything. You have to have charging stations everywhere. I mean, if you've understood the social revolution technologically, well then everybody should be able to do that all the time. We should be Wi-Fi everywhere. What's happening in our city is just amazing. We had a city that emptied out in the 60s, and in 3 years' time is going right back in. So the whole of the downtown is going to be Wi-Fi compatible, as it should be in every city. So no matter where you are, you can use Wi-Fi, but you can also charge. So not just in our museum, it means thinking beyond the museum to the street, that street's your street. It's not just your space of your museum. And the ways that you approach it are many. This idea of an ubiquitous language, vision, and how we would take 8 billion people and communicate with them is kind of the holy grail of communication right now. The smartest entrepreneurs and the ones who are going to make the most money, in my belief, are those who are able to develop universal character systems. And you saw the utopia. I looked at the book in the Leuven library here in the university. I mean, it was as good as George Bernard Shaw putting all his money into Esperanto in his will, unless it didn't take off, which it didn't. And therefore the money went to the British Library and the National Gallery of Ireland and the National Gallery of Scotland instead. But the idea of the Holy Grail of a universal language is something that I think we're going to find more and more necessary. The challenge is that formal language is the only universal language, and therefore we have to find forms that are compatible across the universe. The ubiquity of apps and the whole idea of being able to have incredible resources on your phone, that you don't need to go for knowledge elsewhere or even to the library because it's all going to be on your phone, or so much of it is going to be on your phone. There'll be a lot else that isn't. But for many people, this is basically the way that they're going to consume information from now on. And the changes are dramatic. We've seen photographs that you've shown, Ernst and Loda, these sorts of photographs. I mean, museum going in many museums for me is not a pleasant experience anymore. I mean, God help the Mona Lisa here. You know, but the selfie moment, which was sort of launched in America at the Oscars by Ellen, you know, having her photograph taken, which is now sort of taken off, is this, you know, credible idea of looking at looking at looking. And so that you get this sort of examination of ourselves, of something else, which is meaning about meaning. The latest figures, these will come in January 2017. Watch 2017 on the internet when the figures come in next month. But this was what it was in January 2016. And you can see that, you know, I'm just back from China, and, you know, what's happening there in terms of, you know, everybody wanted to be on WeChat. And if you weren't on WeChat, you just weren't anything. But, you know, I could use a VPN and get Facebook, but people aren't allowed to use Facebook, right? So you can get it no matter what. You can't censor everybody. But the growth is just absolutely massive in terms of social platforms. Now, emojis, which were sort of I think the most successful universal language that we've come up with yet, there are about 2,000 of them now. But they didn't get anywhere until they were launched by Apple in 2011. So 2011 is only 5 years ago. But I don't know if you saw, but last week, MoMA, the Museum of Modern Art in New York, actually accessioned the very first set of emojis. So you can see that this idea, whether they weren't accessioned into the art department, they were accessioned into the design department, right? But the idea of looking for this, Facebook recognition. Imagine being able to recognize every one of your visitors. Well, in Walmart in America, every visitor that goes into Walmart is face recognized. And then they're tracked all around the store. And everything that they bought is trackable. And how long they spent at every shelf is trackable. Well, if they can do it in Walmart, why wouldn't you do it in the museum? We're putting in this security system, which is absolutely amazing. It's totally digital. But it actually is a beam, basically, essentially it's a cloak around a work of art or a sculpture painting. And you can actually move it like a half an inch away from it, an inch away from it, 3 inches, depending on what the activation you want to be. But you can actually face recognize it as well. So the quality of what's available and what museums do with it are basically very distant apart at the moment. So being relevant is knowing what's happening. And what's happening is happening so fast that it's really exciting. The emergence of VR is something that I really want to point to. The types of techniques that we can use today should be things that the museum makes a privilege of showing to people. So I think it's still the case that the vast majority of people have never used a 3D printer. But we've had them for some time. So why don't museums actually show how a 3D printer works? You may be doing that here, I don't know. But, you know, you come in and make your own sculpture right there in front of you. You'd pay for it. You can make money out of it, right? In Toledo, we have at the university, we have a simulation center. And we actually simulated the museum in the simulation center. So you can walk into the museum at the university. Just like you can walk into your vein, or you can walk into your artery, or you can walk into your brain, right? But it's actually in the medical center, and so it's made to promote advanced clinical procedures and surgery. I am absolutely guaranteeing you at your university here you have such a thing. And you may be using it, but to show people it in the museum is what I'm talking about, that this exists in virtual time. So to make ourselves relevant, to show people what you're actually doing. I love this. You know, I didn't realize that most of our staff are doing this all the time. You know, these are Snapchats that sort of fade away. But look at this, like all the single ladies, which of course is a pop song, the Rodin. People are having fun with art history in ways that we need to tap back into the museum. so that we allow them to actually enjoy in the museum what they're already enjoying outside of it. I don't know, how many of you have used Snapchat? Hardly anybody. Okay, well, just a handful anyway. So have you used Snapchat for art history? I mean, look it up. It's just such fun. So the big idea is this, simply. We need to engage visual literacy. That's what the whole day is about today. You're here. You've heard brilliant presentations already. You're establishing your own museum on this principle, and I totally agree with you. It is absolutely the big idea. We need to engage people in being literate in images so that they can read, understand, and write them. Now, writing them, that's the challenge. I'll come to that in a minute. Of the visual languages, we've kind of done this without your competence model. So seeing your competence model is, this is a gift from Europe to America, right? I mean, there's no copyright on ideas. I'll credit you all. But, if there's stuff to raid, you raid me and I raid you. That's the whole idea. We're a not-for-profit. I don't own anything. We share everything. That's the idea of being a museum director. And that's the idea of the Free Academy as well, if you ask me. But of the 4 visual languages that exist, 3 of them are culturally specific, right? I mean, they're difficult because they're contextual, whereas the first one, formal language, is not. I mean, red is red. But red, the idea of red, the symbolic value of red, right, and the meaning of red is different in different places. I mean, you can play that out. You know quite what I mean, right, historically. And so, we need to tackle, first of all, formal language and encourage people to understand what it is, and then engage ideology, or what we would call semiotics, or what we would call hermeneutics in the academic sphere. But, as I said, not helpful in the general sphere. This is our model, which is hard won and has been changed and will change again. It's not a formula. But you can see that on the left side of our triangle, we introduced this second stage, which we realized it's not, you don't move from look to see, you actually observe before you can see. It means taking time. If you don't put slow looking or slow down, you do not get to see something. Just like if you don't slow down, when you hear something, you don't listen to it. It takes time. So that process is the reading phase. So before you get to the writing phase, I think you get to the comprehending or understanding phase. That would be our assessment. And that's this description, analyze, interpret. So this side, and this is basically a 6-step process that we consistently use in our galleries, we use in our programs, and we use in our teaching. And then when you understand something, the question is, what are you going to do about it? So I'm not showing you a whole lot of slides today about Toledo where, we understood that our street needed a lot of help, and halfway down it was pretty well a disaster. And then further down it got better again. In fact, it got really good down towards the water. So what were we going to do with our own street, understanding that everybody approached our museum from that street, and we had to take responsibility for the street? So we have been putting flowers and trees down the center, and we have been putting murals along the walls, and we have been seeing to it that lots of the buildings are being bought up. About 40% of them have changed hands in the last 2 years. The responsibility in your museum is to say, I'm only responsible for the museum. But you can't think like that. If the museum is to be influential on your society, and if design thinking is to be at your root, well, then it must go beyond the walls of your museum, and you must take responsibility. I mean, if you can see it, you must understand it before you can do something about it. But when you understand it, you have to do something about it. Lobby for it, promote it, even actively do something about it. So I've used this on the internet. Many of you have seen this. I'm going to run through it very quickly. This is a painting called The Architect's Dream. It's an absolutely fantastic painting by Thomas Cole. But just to show you very simply how the elements and principles of formal language work. And you can do this with any work of art. You can do it in your own way. But what did you see? Now, most people, when asked that question, they'd start talking about the details, right? Rather than say, I saw a big rectangular shape, which is the first big thing that it was, right? Okay, and then you start to describe the things that were in it, okay? We go to detail because we're focal point learners. But in the visual elements, we have found even our curatorial staff couldn't name the 5 elements of art. Never mind the 8 principles. And there are a couple of other ones. But, if you don't actually understand basic formal vocabulary, how can you possibly move forward with visual literacy? And so we had to get involved in training our staff and training our docents and training our board. And, this works quite simply. You can have fun with it. Okay. and the principles. I'm just putting this up. This is so flaming obvious, but it is so unknown. The majority of people have never ever done a course. In fact, I've rarely met people who've done a course in the methodologies of seeing. The nearest you'll come to it is people who've done BFAs in fine art, and they've done some sort of course on the basic elements and principles. But in art history, it's not a first start. It just isn't. And so we need to work on it. And that's our job, to introduce this. So make sure that people understand how to describe. And we'll hear about visual thinking strategies later, which, essentially leverages this sort of information, but not as a dialogue. It doesn't give it to people. It looks for people to give it to you through a process of engagement. Anyway, that's fun. But you can go onto our website, which we launched in January 2014. It's about to get a complete refresh in the next year. We're working very, very hard on it. A whole lot of information going. We've always seen it as a website for the world. It has a lot of information on it, but it's going to have an awful lot more that we've accumulated in the last 2 years. And it'll be brought back into our website. I wanted to have tma.org, toledomuseum.org, and vislit.org. But what I found was they're leveraged off each other, so we're going to bring it back into toledomuseum.org and make the whole museum about visual literacy, instead of implying that visual literacy is for everybody else and we're part of engendering it. The point is nobody else was doing anything, so we needed to do it ourselves. This point, visual literacy is not a skill, it's a form of critical thinking, is something that I think, the way you say something and nobody listens, and you say something else and everybody listens? Well, everybody heard that. And so my contention is that, the skills are a toolbox. They're like a toolbox that we draw on in order to think critically. And you've got new words that you've used for that, which mean the same thing, and it doesn't really matter. I mean, I like the idea of reflect. Reflect has a lot of intensity to it, but it fundamentally means you're taking time. So I'm going to quickly run through how we're doing this, and these are only just a few aspects. Think of what I'm talking about in terms of looking at the whole site. We've got 36 acres, we've got 6 buildings. We're about to acquire 5 apartment buildings. It will be announced tomorrow. That's we're going 64 apartments. But we want to, have people there who will go to the museum, go across the road to our concert hall, and walk our park. And we want a playground in the park. We want a dog park in the park. We want all sorts of things that people would use in our grounds that would cause them to be playful and actually enjoy it and find it a sensory experience. So in the galleries, this is a bit literal, but I just want to show you how just in 3 galleries now, but going to be applied to them all, but not in this way. It's not meant to be heavy-handed, and it may look a little bit heavy-handed right now, is that we've had to put up text to explain what we mean. But these are collective galleries drawn from different parts of the collection that talk to the idea of speaking visual. And they use this sort of formula. You'll find this on our website. Reading visual language. You take the elements and principles, and the first one is to actually have this vocabulary. Then when you have the vocabulary, you learn to use the stepped method that we've got, okay? So just to go back, the vocabulary, the step method. And we have found that people who know a lot about art actually find this intensely interesting because they've never actually slowed down to use something that doesn't apply to art. It applies to the way you look at everything. So I've got a beautiful tree across the road. It took me a year or 2 to realize it was there, and now it's my best friend, right? Because I look at it not just formally, but the meaning of that tree, going to your point about an individual work of art, the meaning of something for you is the intensity of engagement that you have with it. And so these are the unlocking the meaning of images and the languages. And they play out now in corners of rooms where we're really trying to still educate our audience about how it works. And the playfulness of the way works of art play off each other is something that we want people to really consider. How works of art work. These sorts of interactions. And so these will gradually come down over time as people become more attuned to what we're doing, and the signs will get smaller. The beams that we have shining on the ground indicate the 4 languages. We're constantly trying to remind people that there are 4 visual languages. Most people don't know that. So teaching visual literacy then. Our museum has had a museum school right back to 1912. and it became an accredited part of the university in 1992. But we continue very, very heavily having programs day and night, and we make a lot of money from them. We make about $800,000 a year just in fees, the classes, right? We started baby tours in June. The idea of watching eye movement is absolutely the way child educators engage to the way they find babies react, for example, to different colors. You use eye catching to watch what colors they react to, what colors they don't like. And so baby tours, this started a whole movement in America. The Bass Museum, I should credit, in Miami had started them, but not in this way that was integral for us. We then started to produce lots of collateral. This is growing, so hard copy, web-based books. And then we did toddler tours. Once we knew that baby tours works, and we were evaluating the baby tours and seeing that they work. So we had to put them through a process of evaluation with evaluators. We use evaluation all the time. We use mystery shopping once a month. This is a 90-point survey that mystery shoppers come in, just like they do in stores, right, to find out what way people react. And we get a lot of information from them. Which is very, very helpful. But particularly the feedback on something like this. Then more collateral. This is using the STEP method in architecture on our campus and in works of art. And then this was the big move. In June 2014, we started to ask our staff and our docents and our ambassadors. We've got about 800 volunteers, so 200 docents, 200 ambassadors, and 400 other volunteers. All of our guards, our board, it took 3 years to get our board to be able to do a 2-minute presentation to iPad video on what visual literacy meant to them. In the first year, it was whatever Brian said. By the third year, it was what they experienced themselves, but what visual literacy meant to them. One man, our chair of the board, he described what it's like to be in the marsh at 5:30 in the morning. He hunts and shoots for duck, and with the mist coming over. And he describes this whole sensory experience, which would, for him, meant being visually literate. And then if he understood that there, he could apply it to somewhere else, including the museum. So whether you're into gardening, whether you're into birding, whether you're into football, whatever it is, you are particularly acute as a visually literate person in probably some area of your life. You might be a stamp collector. It doesn't matter. There's some area of your life where you apply all of this methodology, but you don't think to make that methodology work other than instinctively and intuitively in the rest of your life. So this was a huge process, and we're going through a whole round again of training the trainers right now. And this is a 12-hour process. So there's 6 2-hour classes that everybody has done. This uses back-to-back drawing. It uses different types of techniques in the galleries that cause people to really engage with what visual literacy might mean for them. So you can see that we're all action stations. The amount of theory is really way secondary to the amount of practice. We're trial and error. We're using incubator technique, innovation technique. That's what we're doing. This was just last year, over 1,000 tours using this method. Play spaces, we've now got a few of them. Which are really great for kids. Is a very large room. I'm just showing you 2 walls of it. Texture walls. The whole of the community corridor was all about education. When our master planners come in, they told us, like, in 5 minutes, do you realize you have art upstairs and education downstairs? That's how you're doing art education. And I know you've been on a trip to America. You'll see that's the way American museums do it. The educators are downstairs doing a lot of education, right? In fact, I think your room is probably downstairs here too. What if it was upstairs? What if it was upstairs? Then art education would be really important, right? And so I'm challenging myself on that as well. We have many rooms, 3 actually, where you can write on the walls. So I got that idea from Steve Jobs and put it in 5 years ago, where it's all eraser board paint, right? So, people think visual literacy is the extent to which they're able to draw. That's not true. It's just write it visually. It can be words on the wall, it can be drawings on the wall, and people instinctively start to squiggle. They start to do things visually. And so we have tables like that. We have 3 rooms that are, as I say, all eraser board paint. But a lot of our tables now, you can write on them. In fact, in the cafe, we put out crayons deliberately on the brown paper so that people will play games. So they play noughts and crosses, X's and O's, or they do whatever. But, they start to get the idea. Just play. And this is really important. We signed up with Aperture. Do you know Aperture? Incredible photography foundation in America. And we've done a number of programs with them. Sarah McNear runs it. her husband in Wardroper is director of the Frick, and she's done an amazing job by integrating photography. So that's just one example. We take works of art and ask people to be an artist, and we put play blocks in the galleries. We put bricks of different kinds, Lego bricks, in the galleries. And when we first started to do that, people said, you know, people are going to throw them at the works of art. You're going to damage things. It's never happened, right? And it's really fun just to see what people do with this sort of... But remember, we're training from the base up, because hardly anybody's done this in school. I mean, even in school, kids aren't getting this sort of knowledge. And so the whole idea around play at TMA and your playground idea, you know, the analogies of what you're doing and what we're doing right across the waters is just so close. What you're doing as a city is phenomenal. I wish our city, and I think we'll get there, can do this. We're already doing quite a lot, but we've got a long way to go, because we don't have the type of formal arrangements city-wise that you have, the way your city is actually involved in your museum. We're a totally private museum. We're totally independent. We get no state money at all. And so we rely on donors. Post-its really do work. At first I wasn't terribly keen, and now I see they work because people like them and they use them a lot. And we replace these, easily twice a week now on about 3 different boards around the museum. Very quick way to get information. People really like it. And then we've got places like the Glass Pavilion, where we have glass demonstrations every day. And I'm not showing you that. I just put it in so you'd realize that we actually work with artists all the time. We've got a lot of artist in residence programs. We've a glass artist in residence all the time. And every second one is somebody who works in glass, technically competent. And then the next one is an artist who doesn't work in glass but wants to work with our glass artists to produce something for themselves. This is Pinari Sanpitak, who's made incredible multisensory works. We've had some huge ones in the museum. Who's really one of the most distinguished artists in Thailand. We made this glass hammock that you can sit in or lie in our glass workshop. We have a sensory garden. I'm coming toward the end now, but with sensory garden, which we're multiplying these different kinds of gardens around the property. This is a more formal garden that we put in last June. And that's working. And then playgrounds. We've started to put experimental playgrounds to see the type of playgrounds that people like to play with, rather than go and just hire one and stick it in. And this block system, which is available, which is a proprietary system, people absolutely love. We had to change the bark because they started to get a bit dirty. So we learned about how it works, that the type of bark that you use really matters. And obviously parents are very worried that kids might eat it. So it has to be a completely clean bark. So these sorts of things that you go through. And the types of things we're doing, break dancing in the galleries. This was a 24-hour Bach. We started at sunrise and went through to sunrise the next day. 24 hours of Bach inside and outside the museum just last summer, which was absolutely wonderful. And, you know, the whole concept of block parties. Our exhibitions have changed dramatically. I mean, we have the, you know, Manet show. We're working on France Hall show, the traditional ones that we do. But, you know, the art of video games was a huge move for us. And this is a very, very large exhibition exploring the design of video games. We got a whole different audience doing that. And then that moved us into Playtime. Playtime, we had 135,000 visitors come to Playtime. These were contemporary artists who make works of art that you can either climb in, swing on, or do something with. And some of them were absolutely huge. You can look at it on the website. It was very exciting. I mean, this idea that you swing towards, I mean, this was just fantastic. When we took it away, people said, why don't you get rid of the museum and just leave it there? Which wasn't exactly the idea. We had sneaker culture that we did with the Brooklyn Museum. Again, very, very different kind of show. This was the Degas show I mentioned. We started putting these murals around town. We now have a whole lot of them of different kinds down the streets. We've just finished Jaume Plensa's exhibition inside and outside the museum, which was very reflective, very poetic, and very beautiful. And the fact that the works were outside, we were able to do a lot of activities in the parkland and explore how people would actually use that. This exhibition has just ended as well, which is called I Approve This Message. And this was about presidential ads in America since 1952 when they first went on TV. It was a very explosive exhibition, really. We didn't cover the current campaign, which was a good idea. But visual literacy applied to an exhibition. This you can find on a website quite a bit about this as well. And it was the first time we took visual literacy in terms of formal messaging and put it into a whole concept in an exhibition. And then in the community, We work with lots of different organizations. We have 14 organizations that bring kids in on different days of the week between Monday and Friday between 4 and 6 o'clock in the evening. We're involved with the Toledo Public Schools, with the Toledo School for the Arts, which is a top 100 school in the country, in America. Different organizations. We've done 2 studies on our toddlers with the TPS in order to show them that they should take it into the elementary schools, which they're going to do next year. And so you have to start small to convince a big system that this is actually useful in their curriculum. But if you can get there and you get traction, you can start to grow, and I certainly hope we will. We have the University of Toledo's building next door with a lot of undergraduates and some master's students, but basically it's an undergraduate university. And being able to harness their faculty has been very, very helpful as you're harnessing yours in Leuven. This is the other side of the Geary building. It was Geary's first building where he had a back and a front in 1992. A very exciting building. So this is just on our property. You have a Girl Scouts museum here, I saw. We had 1,500 Girl Scouts sleeping overnight in the museum. 1,500 for the centenary of the Girl Scouts of America, because the first chartered group in America was in Toledo, Ohio. Try that once. Okay, it's fantastic. And then think about what other group could you work with that would change the way they think about the museum. Who has slept in the museum? People sleep in the zoo. Sometimes, well, in our zoo they do. But the idea of sleeping overnight. And then yoga. We have yoga going right throughout from May to October now. This was taken with the drone just a few weeks ago. And it's really fun to be able to exercise the museum this way. This is the corridor I was talking about in the street that we've engaged. Once we realized the 2 miles down to the water that we really had to work on it. And so we campus planned that. I've talked about it. This was the Red Ball project. I don't know if you've had that in Leuven, have you? Good. I mean, it's a hoot. For us, it was great because it escaped and it started to roll down the street and it became an internet sensation. Block parties. This is our concert hall that's in the museum. It's a 1,500-seat concert hall where the Toledo Symphony plays. And so we're trying to work it up as a jazz venue and a different kind of music venue. We already have a lot of different kinds of teaching classes and master classes taking place there, but we're exploring it. And then lastly, very lastly, this is the Holy Grail, I think, of this whole issue. Ernst, the issue for me is what is the soft point that causes a government system to actually accept visual literacy as something worth doing? Art museums won't cut it. They cut us when they want to. You have to find a topic that they won't cut. And we've found it. It's called safety training. So we're involved with the National Safety Council in America, which has a kind of point end called the Campbell Safety Institute, which is the CEOs and VPs of the largest corporations in America that deal with safety. Oil companies, motor companies, aviation companies, and so on. And we're training people to be literate in visual literacy so that they can add this in the training program to what isn't working, which is learning the rules. There have been so many disasters in companies that spend fortunes on safety. And the reason is because they're not spending any time on training sensory learning of their workers. And so we see huge growth. We're already at about $200,000 a year on this, and we're going to take it to $2 million, we reckon, in 5 years. But it's not just for us. We see this as a huge move. This city of Leuven has safety training in the police, cultural sensitivity training, these sorts of aspects. Using a museum in this way has massive potential, and we've just seen huge interest where we've never seen interest before. So we're going there. We're going to use the museum in this direction. Internationally, this was Pinnery's work that we had a couple of years ago, Mina Robinson. This is the Chinese Development Forum. I was speaking with 150 Chinese museum directors, art museum directors, 2 weeks ago in Shanghai. The explosion of museums in China is incredible, about 4,000 museums right now. And the International Visual Literacy Association had their first meeting outside of a university when they had it at the Toledo Museum of Art a couple of years ago, but last year in San Francisco, this year in Montreal. You should go after that conference. It actually has to be here. It would be crazy not to, and I know you are. I mean, you have to be, and you will. This is what success really looks like. It's very, very messy, but it's fun. So happy to take questions. Thanks so much for having me. Good luck with everything you're doing. I am completely admiring of all that you are already doing. Thank you.